What happens when a simple neighborhood dispute turns into a full-blown battle for justice? Meet Brenda Carmichael, a woman who tried to bully an entire community into submission. But she picked the wrong neighbor to mess with. What Brenda didn't know: she had been unknowingly paying rent to her worst enemy for years. And when the truth came out, everything changed. But we didn't stop there. In the end, we fought back, armed with nothing but truth, teamwork, and a whole lot of evidence. And what happened next? A victory that turned our little town into a shining example of community strength. Join us as we show you how a simple fishing right turned into a full-scale fight for justice. Stick around for the story of how one neighborhood stood up to a bully and won. It all started when a cop almost arrested me for trespassing on my own property. But before he could finish his sentence, I showed him my deed. Brenda Carmichael, a newcomer to Lake Serenity, had been making life difficult for everyone. She harassed the entire community, calling the police on anyone who dared to exist without her approval. She even went as far as threatening to sue me for $50,000, filing fake police reports, and attempting to bribe county officials to get me evicted from my own land. What she didn't know was that I owned the $800,000 mansion she was renting. It was a quiet morning at Lake Serenity. The scent of pine mixed with mist as the dawn broke. Suddenly, flashing blue police lights filled the air. Gravel crunched under the tires of two squad cars as they pulled up to my grandfather's old cabin. There she was, Brenda, in a bright pink bathrobe, standing on her mansion's deck and pointing at me like I was some kind of criminal. What would you do if someone called the cops on you for fishing on your own property? Let me know below. I bet some of you have HOA horror stories of your own. My name is Marcus, and after 20 years in military logistics and a painful divorce, I inherited my grandfather's cabin on Lake Serenity, Minnesota. Lake Serenity was exactly what I needed after everything I'd been through. It was a small town with only 3,200 people. The cabin itself wasn't fancy, just a 1960s A-frame on 2 acres of paradise. I woke up every day to loons calling across the water, the smell of old cedar and pine, and the cool, fresh air that made my lungs feel like they could finally breathe again after years of Army diesel fumes. This place had been in my family for generations, and for 2 years, it was perfect. The locals followed one simple rule: wave when you see each other, help when someone is in trouble, and mind your own damn business. Then Brenda arrived. She bought the largest house on the lake, an $800,000 monstrosity that looked out of place in the Minnesota woods. In the first week, she introduced herself to half the lake, wearing white capris and cardigans so bright they could signal airplanes. She pretended to be sweet, but her cold eyes gave away her true nature. One morning, as I sat on my dock with a cup of coffee, I heard the unmistakable sound of an overpowered pontoon boat. It cut through the peaceful morning like a chainsaw. "Yoo-hoo. Hello there, neighbor." Brenda's voice boomed across the water, more annoying than welcoming. She approached my dock with a grin that was more fake than a politician's promise. "I'm Brenda Carmichael from the executive estate across the way," she announced, before telling me she was there on official HOA business. She pulled out a manila folder like it was some kind of dramatic reveal. Apparently, the Lake Serenity Homeowners Association had voted to update aesthetic standards, and my rustic cabin didn't meet their new guidelines. She pointed out my old aluminum boat and fishing gear, claiming that the whole area looked like a bait shop explosion. I was taken aback. "Lady, this property's been in my family longer than you've been alive. And there's no HOA covenant on my deed, and there won't be." But her mask slipped, revealing the coldness beneath. "We'll see about that, soldier boy." She gunned her pontoon and sped away, sending a wave crashing into my dock, spilling my coffee. The burning scent of her expensive perfume lingered in the air. As I looked at her mansion in the distance, I knew this wasn't just a neighborly dispute. This was a battle, and I had just been drafted. 3 days later, an envelope was taped to my door. It was a violation notice from the Lake Serenity Homeowners Association, demanding I pay $500 for failing to meet their aesthetic standards, with threats of fines and property lands. The notice looked official, with red lettering and legal-sounding language that could scare anyone into paying up. But I wasn't most people. I went down to the Cedar Falls courthouse to dig deeper. The smell of old leather and dusty files filled the air as I spoke to Dolores, the elderly county clerk. She informed me that Brenda had been in the courthouse several times, asking about enforcement procedures and land authority. It turns out, the HOA had only 12 members out of the 47 lake properties. In legal terms, they had no real authority over my property. But that wasn't the end of it. While going through the records, I found something suspicious. Several properties on the lake had recently been transferred to Carmichael Holdings, LLC. A quick search revealed that Brenda was running an unlicensed vacation rental business, turning quiet family cabins into party houses for tourists. The person lecturing me about community standards was actually the one destroying them. My grandfather had always told me, before you fight City Hall, make sure you know who runs the city. So, I did my homework. I found out that Brenda's HOA was a sham, created just to intimidate people into following her self-imposed rules. I also discovered that she was breaking the very standards she was trying to enforce. Armed with this knowledge, I decided to test the community's sentiments through social media. I posted a simple question on Facebook: has anyone else received violation notices from the Lake Serenity HOA? The responses came flooding in. 8 different lake residents reached out, each with their own story about Brenda's harassment. She had been targeting elderly widows and young families, threatening them over trivial things like bird feeders and mailbox colors. Janet, a retired librarian, had been keeping meticulous records in a binder. Tom from the marina had photos of bounced checks. Even 90-year-old Florence had noticed strange activity at Brenda's supposed vacation rentals. I created a private group chat called Lake Serenity Truth Squad and began organizing a plan. That evening, I received a call from an unknown number. It was the beginning of a fight that would go far beyond what I had ever imagined. Brenda's voice oozed through the speaker like a mix of honey and industrial solvent. Marcus, sweetie, I saw your little Facebook post. You're making this unnecessarily difficult for yourself. I tried to keep it civil, just asking questions out of neighborly curiosity. Her tone shifted, cold as ice, when she said, "Oh honey, you really don't want to go down this road with me." I braced myself for what was coming next. I have connections you couldn't imagine, and I will absolutely report you for harassment and cyberbullying. The line went dead, leaving me staring at my phone, wondering what kind of connections a vacation rental scammer like Brenda thought she had with local authorities. As the evenings settled over the lake, I sat on my dock, listening to the gentle percussion of the waves and the distant hum of community life. The golden sunset bathed everything in its warm glow, including the homes of the Truth Squad members scattered along the shoreline. Brenda had made one crucial mistake. She'd picked a fight with someone who actually knew how to gather intelligence before going to war. If Brenda thought a little Facebook drama would scare me off, she clearly didn't understand military veterans. We don't retreat. We adapt, improvise, and overthink everything until 3 a.m., plotting out 17 different strategies. I was ready for whatever she had in store. Tuesday morning, Tom Hendris from County Code Enforcement showed up at my door, looking like he'd rather be getting a root canal. He had to follow up on reports about dock violations and an abandoned vehicle. Tom measured everything twice, checking his clipboard before shaking his head in disbelief. "Between you and me," he said quietly, "this is the 23rd complaint from the same address in 6 months." Apparently, Brenda had the county office on speed dial. But the real kicker came when Tom let slip that Brenda had tried to bribe him with a $100 bill during their last meeting, offering it as a consulting fee for finding creative ways to interpret building codes. Brenda wasn't just bullying the neighbors, she was trying to buy off government employees. That evening, the Truth Squad attended Brenda's emergency HOA meeting, which was more like a dictatorship than anything democratic. The meeting took place in her mansion's massive great room, a space so decorated it looked like a furniture showroom exploded in shades of beige and gold. Only 6 people showed up, mostly property managers from her rental empire, who looked as miserable as anyone would be at a forced meeting. Brenda presented a PowerPoint titled "Protecting Our Community Investment," which was more about slandering non-compliant properties than actual community concerns. Janet, ever the observant one, took meticulous notes. But the real gold came when she noticed Brenda frequently glancing at her expensive Rolex and nervously eyeing the kitchen. During a bathroom break, Janet overheard a heated phone conversation where Brenda was telling someone, "I told you the payments are coming. These people are more stubborn than expected, but I've got new strategies, legal pressure, code enforcement, whatever it takes." It all clicked. This wasn't about community standards. It was about money. Brenda was under financial pressure, and she was using harassment and intimidation to try and cover it up. As I dug deeper into Brenda's background, I learned she was using her role in the HOA to prop up a failing business. Her lawyer, the same one who had sent me that threatening letter, specialized in foreclosure defense and debt collection, not the type you'd hire for neighborhood disputes unless you were already in serious financial trouble. With this new information, I filed my own complaint against Brenda for harassment, false reports, and misusing county resources. I wasn't just going to sit back while she tried to bully me out of my property. Using the contact detail from the property management company, I reached out to the actual owner of Brenda's mansion. They were more than interested to hear about Brenda's creative interpretation of her lease agreement and the unauthorized business activities she had been running. Deputy Rodriguez, who had been tracking the pattern of complaints from our lake, pulled me aside after I filed my complaint. "Off the record," he said, leaning against his cruiser, "we've been documenting everything. Nothing criminal yet, but she's walking a very thin line, and we're watching her." I stood there, listening to the sounds of distant family barbecues and the soft rustle of pine trees. Brenda had made a critical mistake. She had underestimated this community. Instead of scaring people into submission, she had united us all against her. The smell of charcoal and laughter mixed with the pine-scented evening air, reminding me that some things, like home and community, were worth fighting for. The next morning, everything was calm until the unmistakable crunch of police car tires on gravel shattered the stillness. Blue lights flickered across my cabin walls like a twisted version of the aurora borealis, and I could almost feel Brenda's satisfaction radiating from her mansion across the lake. Two officers stepped out of their cruiser, looking like they'd rather be doing anything else. The younger cop had that fresh-faced earnestness, while his partner, Sergeant Peterson, had the weary expression of a man who'd seen it all. "Mr. Marcus, we've received reports that you're trespassing on private property and making threatening statements toward a female resident," they said. I invited them in for coffee because, honestly, if you're going to be falsely accused at dawn, you might as well be civilized about it. Sergeant Peterson, after taking a sip of my coffee, admitted, "We have to respond to all calls, but between you and me, this complaint doesn't pass the smell test." That's when I brought out my secret weapon, the deed to my property, the evidence of Brenda's illegal actions, and the solid backing of the community that had finally had enough. This fight was just getting started. Documentation, security camera footage, property deeds, a complete timeline of Brenda's harassment campaign, and even Tom's written statement about her attempted bribery. I had learned during my time in the Army that paperwork wins wars, and this one was about to become very one-sided. Sergeant Peterson reviewed the footage of my supposed threatening behavior, which actually showed me helping elderly Florence load her fishing gear while Brenda lurked behind her mansion's windows, looking like some suburban villain. As for the trespassing, that happened on a public access road, a road that had been public long before Brenda ever set foot in Lake Serenity, despite her newly erected private property signs. Peterson glanced at the footage and muttered, "Either you're the world's politest terrorist or someone's been pulling our leg." While the officers reviewed my evidence, my phone rang. It was Dave Morrison, a private investigator who moonlighted at the local tackle shop. His findings about Brenda would have made a soap opera writer weep with envy. Brenda owed $47,000 in unpaid HOA fees from her previous community in Minneapolis. Even better, she had been sued by that HOA and lost. This explained her deep familiarity with legal intimidation tactics. But that was only the beginning. Brenda also owed money to contractors, credit card companies, and had a history of using legal threats to delay payments until creditors settled for pennies. Dave uncovered something else. Brenda's rental operation was violating zoning ordinances and operating without the necessary business licenses. She had been running her vacation rental business illegally while lecturing the rest of us about community standards. The Truth Squad had now grown to 15 Lake residents, each with their own Brenda horror story. Tom from the marina revealed that she owed $3,200 in dock fees and had threatened to sue him for discrimination when he demanded payment. The hardware store owner shared footage of Brenda ordering supplies and then disputing the charges with her credit card company, claiming defective materials she never returned. The pattern was clearer than the lake water on a calm morning. Brenda used legal threats to avoid paying legitimate debts, hoping people would give up and write off the losses instead of fighting her in court. Peterson, after reviewing my documentation, looked up and said, "Mr. Marcus, I strongly suggest you consider filing charges for filing false police reports. This lady's been using us as her personal enforcement arm, and that stops today." As the officers drove away, the tires crunching across the gravel sounded like victory. Brenda's silhouette disappeared from her mansion window, and the morning mist rose off the lake, carrying with it the scent of pine and possibility. My attorney had scheduled a meeting for tomorrow, claiming he had news that would change everything. Something in his voice suggested Brenda's house of cards was about to collapse in ways she never anticipated. Arthur Peaton, my grandfather's lawyer since Carter was president, was as old school as it gets. His office smelled like leather and expensive cigars, with law books stacked so high they could bury an unsuspecting client under centuries of legal precedent. "Marcus, you might want to sit down for this," Arthur said, adjusting his wire-rimmed glasses. After reviewing my grandfather's estate more carefully, Arthur spread out some documents across his mahogany desk like a poker player revealing a royal flush. Property deeds, trust agreements, and incorporation papers that I had never seen before. "When your grandfather died, you inherited more than just the cabin," Arthur explained. "In 1987, he created the Northwoods Property Trust as a tax shelter. You now own 60% of a trust that holds 4 lakefront properties." I froze. 4 properties, including the $800,000 mansion Brenda is living in. Arthur nodded. The words hit me like a slap with a wet fish. I had been fighting my tenant without even realizing it. For 3 years, Brenda had been paying rent to a property management company that had deposited her payments into an account I never knew existed. The woman who had been terrorizing me about property standards was paying me every month. Arthur then revealed something more damning. The lease agreement had clauses about maintaining community harmony, prohibition on unlicensed business activities, and the peaceful enjoyment of neighboring properties. Brenda had violated 14 terms of the lease. I asked, "How far behind is she on rent?" 2 months, with late fees accumulating. The property management company was preparing eviction proceedings, but they needed trust approval. "That's you." I stated the documents, my mind racing. Brenda's desperate behavior now made perfect sense. She wasn't just dealing with harassment complaints and zoning violations. She was about to lose the foundation of her entire rental empire. I asked Arthur, "She doesn't know I'm her landlord, does she?" Arthur cracked a smile. "Not unless she's smarter than her recent behavior suggests." The implications hit me like a tactical revelation. I could evict Brenda immediately for lease violations, but that would feel like winning by technicality rather than justice. My grandfather had taught me that true power meant knowing when not to use it. I asked Arthur, "What would you recommend?" Arthur leaned back in his chair, the wood creaking like old ship timbers. "Give her one final opportunity to make things right. Document everything. Offer mediation. Show you tried to resolve things reasonably. Courts appreciate landlords who exhaust diplomatic options before pulling the nuclear trigger. But if she escalates further," Arthur tapped the eviction notice he had already prepared. 30 days to vacate for multiple lease violations. Clean, legal, and absolutely devastating to her financial house of cards. I left Arthur's office feeling like I had just discovered I'd been playing chess while everyone else was playing checkers. The afternoon sun painted Main Street golden, and for the first time in months, I felt like the universe had a sense of humor. Brenda, the HOA dictator and vacation rental queen, had been paying her worst enemy to let her destroy his peace and quiet. Sometimes the best revenge is realizing you held all the cards from the very beginning. Arthur became my strategic advisor, channeling decades of courtroom wisdom into what he called the nuclear option playbook. His office became my mission control, with manila folders spreading across every surface like legal kudzu. Arthur approached this case with the precision of a Swiss watchmaker, treating landlord-tenant law like a football game where you set clear rules and bench the players who refuse to follow them. He explained, "You need to be methodical. No personal feelings, just consequences for documented violations." As I reviewed the documents, I realized how completely Brenda had underestimated me, and how her empire was about to come crashing down, piece by piece. Dave Morrison, my private investigator, had finished his report, and the satisfied grin on his face told me he had struck gold. Brenda owed $73,000 to multiple creditors, had tax liens pending on her previous property in Minneapolis, and a credit score that made subprime mortgages look like a dream come true. "Here's something your audience should know," Dave said, sliding papers across Arthur's desk. "You can search public records online for property liens, judgments, and tax issues in most counties. Knowledge is power in disputes, and most of this information costs nothing but time to find." Janet, our retired librarian turned intelligence analyst, had organized the community documentation project with military precision. Her three-ring binder was a masterpiece, time-stamped photos, witness statements, and a cross-reference index of Brenda's harassment incidents that read like a textbook on criminal psychology. Tom at the marina provided receipts for unpaid bills and photocopies of bounced checks. Local contractors shared identical stories of payment disputes followed by legal threats. Sheriff Deputy Rodriguez, who had been tracking complaint patterns like a bloodhound following bacon grease, offered advice that straddled official procedure and friendly guidance. "Document everything," he emphasized. "Courts want to see that reasonable people tried reasonable solutions before things escalated." The technical preparation for our case felt like planning a military operation. If military operations involved elderly librarians and small-town lawyers plotting the downfall of vacation rental empires. I installed additional security cameras, equipped with audio recording capabilities because, apparently, my property was more surveilled than a federal courthouse. Arthur noted that security cameras with audio can legally record on your property in most states, but advised that it was always important to verify local laws first. We developed an escalation protocol, essentially a step-by-step plan to give Brenda every opportunity to save face while documenting her refusal to act reasonably. First, I would approach her as a concerned neighbor, offering mediation through county community services. If she refused or escalated, we would publicly reveal my landlord relationship at the next town council meeting. Janet researched Robert's rules of order like she was preparing for a Senate hearing, while Arthur prepared legal notice templates for every possible scenario. The Truth Squad had grown into a neighborhood watch program that would make the NSA proud. 15 Lake residents coordinated through our group chat, sharing real-time updates about Brenda's increasingly erratic behavior. Tom at the marina agreed to document any future incidents, while local businesses committed to supporting our paper trail with their own harassment documentation. We even reached out to media contacts in case the situation attracted public interest. The local newspaper editor had already shown curiosity about the lake dispute, especially after hearing whispers about bribery attempts and zoning violations. The community protection aspect felt like something out of a feel-good movie, except with more legal documentation and fewer musical numbers. Several elderly neighbors installed security cameras after Brenda's intimidation visits, while Truth Squad members started accompanying vulnerable residents during errands to prevent isolated confrontations. Sitting in Arthur's office, surrounded by evidence folders and strategic planning documents, I realized we'd accidentally created something beautiful, a community that refused to be bullied. What happened next proved that desperate people make spectacularly stupid decisions, especially when they are cornered like rabid raccoons in designer cardigans. The sabotage began subtly, which should have been my first warning that Brenda had moved from amateur harassment to genuine criminal behavior. She started monitoring our Truth Squad activities through Facebook stalking, creating fake profiles to gather intelligence and spread counter-narratives about my supposed instability. Then, on Tuesday night, my security cameras caught something that raised my military paranoia to new heights. At 2:17 a.m., a pickup truck matching her handyman's vehicle crept past my dock like a suburban ninja mission gone wrong. The driver wore a baseball cap pulled low, but the truck's license plate was clearly visible under the LED floodlights. Wednesday morning brought a surprise that would have ruined my day if I hadn't learned to expect the worst from people like Brenda. My fishing boat was sitting half-submerged at the dock, looking like a maritime crime scene. The drain plug had been removed with surgical precision. Not loose, not damaged, just gone. The water damage to the motor and electronics was around $2,800, not to mention the tackle gear that had been in my family longer than Brenda had been alive. Here's where Brenda's desperation revealed her fundamental misunderstanding of how evidence works in the 21st century. My security cameras had captured everything in glorious high-definition detail, complete with audio of a handyman muttering about crazy lady jobs while he worked. I filed the police report with the methodical precision of someone who'd been documenting harassment for months. Within an hour, Sheriff's Deputy Rodriguez arrived, took one look at the video evidence, and shook his head like a man watching taxpayer money circle the drain. "This crossed the line," Rodriguez said, examining the deliberately removed drain plug. "Property damage is a felony if it exceeds $1,000, and your electronics alone put this in serious criminal territory." While I was dealing with insurance adjusters and marine mechanics, Brenda was apparently having her own version of a breakdown across the lake. Truth Squad members reported her increasingly erratic behavior that made her previous harassment look tame. She began approaching elderly neighbors, demanding they choose sides in what she called the lake war. Florence, bless her heart, told Brenda exactly where to stick her loyalty demands, using language that would make a sailor blush. Tom at the marina finally banned Brenda from the fuel dock after she screamed at a teenage employee about conspiracy pricing. The grocery store incident became local legend within 24 hours. Brenda had a complete meltdown at the checkout line, accusing the cashier of overcharging her and demanding to speak to corporate headquarters about systematic harassment of professional women. When the manager asked her to leave after she started filming other customers, Brenda's behavior was exposed for all to see. As her paranoia and desperation grew, Brenda's credibility crumbled. The walls were closing in on her, and she had nowhere to run. But the best part, we had her on tape. All of it. The Truth Squad had become a beacon of resistance, and Brenda's days as a self-proclaimed HOA dictator were numbered. The real intelligence gold mine came from Janet's library research skills, which had uncovered Brenda's residential history going back 8 years. The pattern was identical at every address. Neighbor disputes escalating into harassment complaints, accusations of unstable and dangerous behavior directed at anyone who stood up to her, an eventual departure under circumstances suggesting legal pressure. Previous landlords described similar escalation patterns, all ending in eviction proceedings. One Minneapolis property manager had documented a restraining order after Brenda threatened to destroy a neighbor who had complained about her unlicensed dog breeding operation. Another apartment complex had security footage of her keying cars belonging to residents who'd reported noise violations. Meanwhile, my silent preparation intensified like a military operation approaching D-Day. Arthur filed a restraining order documenting the property damage and harassment pattern. We coordinated with the insurance investigator about potential fraud charges, as Brenda's handyman had conveniently developed amnesia about his late-night visits to the marina. The pressure was building from multiple directions. Online reviews for Brenda's vacation rentals began mentioning unstable management and neighborhood disputes, causing her booking rates to plummet faster than her credit score. The property management company received formal complaints about tenant behavior violating community standards. County zoning enforcement had begun a formal investigation into her unlicensed business operations. Meanwhile, the local newspaper editor had started asking uncomfortable questions about corruption allegations and harassment patterns. As I sat on my repaired dock that evening, listening to the gentle splash of waves against new bumpers and breathing air that smelled like victory mixed with pine needles, I realized Brenda had made a final tactical error. She had turned criminal behavior into documented evidence that would destroy her in any court of law. When desperate people run out of legal options, they usually do one of two things: accept defeat gracefully or double down on stupidity until they achieve legendary status. Brenda, being Brenda, chose door number 2 with the enthusiasm of a kamikaze pilot heading for an aircraft carrier. What happened next would have been hilarious if it weren't so pathetically criminal. County Commissioner Bill Hayes, who had been serving Cedar Falls for 12 years without a single ethics complaint, received Brenda's approach like a tornado at a church picnic. According to Bill's later testimony, she strode into his office carrying a designer purse and the kind of confidence that comes from huffing your own supply of entitlement. "Commissioner Hayes, I have a proposition that could benefit both of us," Brenda announced, sliding an envelope across his desk like she was buying state secrets instead of attempting to bribe a small-town politician. $5,000 cash for consulting services regarding the environmental hazard that is my property, she suggested, air quoting her way through the absurdity of calling my grandfather's cabin a threat to lake water quality. Bill Hayes had been in politics long enough to recognize corruption when it walked into his office in white capris and desperation perfume. He immediately reported the attempted bribery to the district attorney's office, triggering an investigation that would make Watergate look like a parking ticket dispute. But Brenda wasn't done. She took her corruption shopping spree around town, making similar approaches to the zoning inspector and even attempting to bribe a sheriff's deputy with what she called a community safety donation for overlooking her minor business license violations. The zoning inspector, a by-the-book guy named Carl, wore a wire during their second meeting. The recording quality was so clear, you could hear Brenda's jewelry jingling as she counted out bills while explaining how Marcus, the dangerous veteran, needed to be relocated for community safety. Deputy Rodriguez documented a bribery attempt in an official report that read like a textbook example of how not to influence public officials. Brenda had managed to turn a neighborhood dispute into a federal case faster than you could say conspiracy to commit corruption. When Arthur called with news about the DA's investigation, his voice carried that special tone lawyers use when they're trying not to sound too pleased about their client's vindication. "Marcus, she's facing potential prison time. Bribery of public officials is a felony, and it carries serious consequences." I felt conflicted in ways my military training hadn't prepared me for. I had wanted justice, not to watch someone's life implode in real time. But Brenda had crossed lines that transformed a simple neighborhood dispute into criminal territory, and there was no putting that toothpaste back in the tube. The local newspaper editor, who had been tracking the story with the persistence of a bloodhound following bacon grease, contacted me for an interview. "This has grown beyond neighborhood problems," she said. "Public corruption allegations are legitimate news, and the community deserves to know what's happening." The media attention triggered Brenda's final public meltdown, which took place at the boat launch in front of 27 witnesses who probably thought they were just coming to launch their fishing boats, not watch a daytime television drama unfold in real time. "This is all conspiracy," Brenda screamed, pointing at me with venom. "He's been stalking and terrorizing me for months. I demand he pay my legal fees and moving expenses." The accusation was so ridiculous that several witnesses actually laughed. Florence, who'd been loading fishing gear with the patience of someone who'd outlived 3 husbands and 2 presidents, spoke up with the authority of someone who'd earned the right to say exactly what she thought. "Honey, I've lived on this lake for 60 years, and you're the problem, hey? That boy hasn't done anything but fish and mind his own business, while you've been running around threatening lawsuits like some kind of legal terrorist." Brenda realized she had lost all community support and stormed off, threatening to hire real lawyers, money she clearly didn't have. That evening, Arthur advised me to reveal the landlord relationship publicly at the next town council meeting. "Time to end this before she hurts herself or someone else more seriously," he said, organizing documents with the precision of a man planning a courtroom victory. "Her criminal behavior has forced your hand." Carrying a manila folder thick enough to sink a battleship, I stood before a room that fell silent, except for the hum of fluorescent lights and the distant sound of someone's stomach growling. Apparently, democracy makes people hungry. "Thank you all for coming tonight," I began, looking out at the faces I'd come to call neighbors over the past few months. 3 months ago, I thought I was dealing with a simple neighbor dispute. Tonight, I'd like to share what I've actually discovered. Arthur had prepared a presentation that would make corporate executives weep with envy. Property ownership documents were projected onto the gymnasium's pull-down screen, the letters large enough to be read from the parking lot. The audience gasped in unison when the truth became clear. like 300 people realizing they've been watching a magic trick performed in reverse.